Hi, and welcome to the Leadership Tales podcast. I'm Colin Hunter, and I'm your host. We've just concluded our 5th season of the podcast, and today I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of my favorite moments from Series 5. We've found some of the best moments with Chris Wilson, Rich Diviney, Adam Billing, Joshua Seiden, Ken Mossman, and a unique combination of Tom Kaden and Michael Gingerich of Someone to Tell It To. They'll share the unique perspectives on leadership and tying back into some of the personal stories from their careers, as well as sharing actionable insights and tips that we can use for our careers. So let's dive in. So one of the most fascinating, inspiring stories from me that we've featured on the Leadership Tales podcast was that of Chris Wilson, who was sentenced to life in prison. While he was incarcerated, Chris developed a master plan to get his life back on track. Implementing this plan and was eventually released. Great story.
My mom and I was attacked by this police officer who she stopped seeing, and he sexually assaulted my mom. He beat us up and lost his job because of it. But when he got out of jail, he started stalking our family, and so I started carrying a gun. And this was around the time that my brother and cousin were shot in front of the house. My brother survived, but my cousin passed away. And then they came after me next, and I ended up taking a person's life. I was 17 years old. I was charged as an adult and sentenced to natural life in prison. And so when I first went to prison, I fell into a deep depression for my first 2 years. I couldn't believe that they would throw my life away. I was 118 pounds, didn't even have a mustache on my face. And they had told me that I would grow old and die in prison. And it was around this time that I had met someone who also had a life sentence. And he was working really hard on teaching himself computer programming. He had this plan and this belief that if he worked really hard, that he can make it home one day and be successful. And I thought he was crazy at first. I laughed at him, I remember. He says, we have everything taken away from us, but no one can take away the knowledge that we put in our minds. And he says, this is how I'll be free one day and I'll pay it forward. And that really clicked with me. And I went back to my cell and I wrote up a 2-page bucket list, or I call it my master plan, of all the things I wanted to do with my life, how I wanted to get a college degree. I wanted to learn Spanish. I wanted to get a high school diploma. I wanted to be a successful entrepreneur. I wanted to buy all my dream cars, a black Corvette convertible, a black Ferrari.
Now you're talking.
I'll write a book one day. Yeah. So I sent it to my judge and my grandmother, and they became my accountability partners. And so I worked really hard for about a decade in prison and got my high school diploma, college degree, taught myself Spanish, Italian, went on to learn Mandarin, and became a mentor helping other people. And finally, I got a second chance to get to live my life. And the judge told me that I had to finish everything on the plan that I had sent her. And so I've been home now for 10 years. I ended up serving 16 and a half years in prison. I've been home now for over 10. I've started several companies. I've become an artist. I've published my book, The Master Plan, which I'm very proud of. It's my life's work. And I'm paying it forward by mentoring and helping people through my foundation, by helping people change their mindset. I believe all of us have potential. Some people's potential is just untapped and they can't find that switch. And so we help people find that switch. And when I'm not doing that, I'm making art and I'm traveling all around the world.
Whoa. We could just end it there, drop the mic and go, what a story. Secondly, I'd love the opportunity to meet people who have a military background because they always have fascinating insights on leadership. And Rich Diviney is no exception. Rich is a former US Navy SEAL who was involved heavily in the SEAL selection process. And what he's done is determine the key attributes that make somebody a high performer. In this clip, Rich is going to share the difference between skills and attributes. It's an important distinction for our work and for yours.
We often look at performance just at the surface level, and we look at what I would define as skills, very visible things. So skills, just to kind of put it into real simple terms, skills are they're not inherent to our nature. In other words, none of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball or drive a car, right? We're taught to do those things. We learn how to do those things. Skills direct our behavior in known and specific environments. So here's how and when to throw a ball or ride a bike or drive a car. And then skills, because they're very visible, they're very easy to assess and measure. In other words, you can see how well anybody does any one of those things, and you can put scores around them and stats around them. But this is why we get seduced by skills when we're picking teams a lot of times, because you can put skills on a resume and you can see the stats, you can see the numbers on a skills. The problem with skills is they don't tell us how we're going to show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill. This is when we lean on our attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are innate. All right, all of us are born with levels of patience, adaptability, resilience, situational awareness. Now, we can certainly develop these things over time and experience, but you can see levels of this stuff in very small children, which means there's a nature-nurture element to attributes. Attributes don't direct our behavior. They inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up to an environment. So in other words, my son's levels of resilience and perseverance informed the way he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so, right? And then finally, because they're hidden in the background, they're very difficult to assess and measure and test. It's hard to see them, hard to measure them. You can see them the most visibly and viscerally during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty. But they often get overlooked in normal interview processes or hiring processes, because there's not a lot of stress and challenge involved, and people are just kind of seduced by these and drawn to the big red light that is skills. But if we're discounting attributes in performance, we're discounting a huge portion of the performance picture, and most definitely we're discounting the portion of performance that matters most when you want a team to operate in uncertain, challenging, and stressful situations.
It resonates with me because part of our assessment for our team is we do a 10-minute exercise where it's a role play, but it's a real scenario where they're put under pressure by a client and they have to respond. And what we're testing is not that they get a successful outcome, but it's about how they stay resilient and stay connected in the moment. And that's what the SEALs would have done to test what they were doing.
So interesting military training holistically across the board. Obviously, the SEALs take it to the extreme level, as do the SPS, right? But holistically, it's about throwing people into very challenging environments. In other words, I spent, SEAL training, for example, it's called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL Training. It's out in San Diego, California. It's 6 months long. It's it's known as one of the most arduous programs on the planet. It's about a 90% attrition rate. So only about 10% of the folks who start finish it, right? You spend in SEAL training, I remember when I was doing this work, I recalled, so you spend hundreds of hours in SEAL training running around with big heavy boats on your head, exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and running around with those things, doing thousands of push-ups, freezing in the surf zone. And as I thought about it when I was doing this work initially, I had already done hundreds of combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. I had done thousands of training evolutions. Never on one of them did I ever carry a heavy boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole, right? So what they were doing in that training was not training us in the skills to be Navy SEALs. They were putting us into situations, into environments, into experiences to tease out these attributes, because that's what they were looking for. And that's why the military holistically, this is kind of an unconscious genius about military boot camp or the training like that. They're looking for attributes first, and then they start training. Okay, now we're going to show you how to manage and shoot your gun, right? That's a skill, but they have to have the attributes first.
And then we have Adam Billing. I've worked with Adam for years and implemented design thinking at Potential Squared. Adam is the founder and CEO of Treehouse Innovation, a consultancy that specializes in design thinking and building cultures of innovation and experimentation. So listen as Adam shares the principles behind design thinking and why you might find it beneficial.
If you look at design thinking, what is it really besides understand what the people you are designing for or related to the problem that you're trying to solve, understand what they care about before you start coming up with your ideas of what you think is a wonderful solution for them. It's about involving diverse perspectives and coming up with lots of ideas before you settle on one quickly. And then it's about creating rough sketches and prototypes so you can test your assumptions before just building, that thing that you're sure is going to be wonderful. Those principles, those fundamentals never go away. I mean, those things exist because I think just in the world of Well, just being human. I think a lot of our natural tendencies steer us down a kind of an unhelpful path of, leading with our own ideas or not involving lots of people, just taking our own ideas and run with it. And as soon as we've got a great idea, we just start building and trying to convince the world it's great. Design thinking helps us overcome those very, I think, eternal challenges that we as people on Earth face. So I don't think it's going anywhere, and I don't think it's really changed much.
And I love that because they're guiding principles in a lot of ways, aren't they? I mean, we talk about new practices that become habitual, that are ingrained. For example, the how might we statement for me was transformational to start a strategy session with how might we rather than here's the problem we've got to solve, in terms of what we're doing. So the how might we was instrumental. So when we think about guiding principles, the other thing that I love about what you're saying there is if you just take putting the user at the center of what you're looking at, the human, that's where everybody's now saying, oh, empathy is the new big thing in leadership. And no, it's not the new big thing. It should have been there for ages.
Yeah. There's always got to be new books, right? There's always got to be new HBR articles.
So you're blaming the authors then, basically. As one.
I'm looking right at it. Yeah, I think it's there are absolute timeless truths that are at work here about how people work better together and get to solutions that matter for the people they're designing for. That you can call it what you want, paint it any color you want, but a lot of those things are embodied in human-centered design.
And I'd love to explore a bit of the work you do because you and I having a conversation the other day about experimenting, and some of the constructs in design thinking are quite difficult to get your head around. One, observing without judgment for me is always, as a judgmental person with lots of opinions, I really struggle with that. But I think that the key thing for me is this concept of experiments and the experimental mindset. And you're working with Gene in terms of the diagnostic. I'd love to just dig into that because there's a power in that and the thinking, the insights you got from doing that. Do you want to explain a bit about what the work is? Yeah.
Sure. No, happy to. So I think experimentation, again, kind of going back to that principle is almost, looking at design thinking as a way of protecting ourselves from our own worst, reflexes. Experimentation, I think, is the toughest thing to embed in a lot of ways, because what do we mean by that? First of all, it's the idea is when you have a new idea or a new solution that you're super excited about, you had that eureka moment in the shower or whatever, it's changing your natural reflex, at least for many of us, that natural reflex is, okay, I'm going to start building it up and I'm going to go around and start showing some people and basically convince them what a great idea it is. And if I really want to convince them, I really need to build this thing out. Maybe I need to have a spreadsheet that's going to show how much money it makes, or a PowerPoint where the formatting's perfect, that shows what the sales pitch will look like. I'm going to, really build it out. As opposed to doing that, it's listing out very systematically, immediately, what those key assumptions you're making around the user, the ultimate customer, whoever it is for this idea, what they'll be able to do and willing to do or interested in doing. And then going out and testing each one of those assumptions one by one, really, and doing as quickly as you can to kind of get that really early learning into your idea and finding out what's wrong with it, because every new idea is born with all kinds of inherent flaws, but finding out what those are really early. So if we think about that's what we mean by experimentation.
It was a pleasure to have Josh Seiden on the show. Josh is an expert in the UX UI space, as well as a speaker and author of 4 books. And his work on outcomes was critical to my thinking when I first heard it and first read that book. So what you'll get from today's clip is where Josh has a perspective on purpose as the driving force behind innovation and how it needs to serve the consumer, not the creator. So listen to how he approaches it in this next clip.
In 2011, I discovered the work of Eric Ries. Eric wrote an important book, I think, called The Lean Startup. And it's a great book. And Eric says sort of the key question in technology is not can you build it? Because engineers can build amazing things. The question is, should you build it? Does anybody want it? And sort of hidden in that question is, is the software valuable? Does it create the outcome that we think we're going to generate, right? You shouldn't build software that just runs, right? We need to build software that creates value and creates an outcome. And sort of as I lived in that world, thinking about outcomes, we use the idea of outcomes in Lean UX in the first book. And we've used it. The book is in its third edition now. We've used it subsequently, and we've continued to teach it. It sort of became clear that that outcomes was an important concept that was sort of poorly defined. It was sort of fuzzy. What did it mean, outcome? People talk about outcomes, but they just mean it as a synonym for results. So in sort of developing the idea, I came to understand that the user, the customer, the organization, the planet.
So what I loved about the book, Josh, was it really challenged my thinking. As a leader, I'm focused on outputs. That's what I can control. And the outcomes, it's more nebulous. It's almost linking that to the how might we's. So it's great for the mind that goes like that. But in terms of the writing them, it is very tricky to do. Tell us a bit about the process to get that, because that is one of the things in the book you say. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it is difficult. It's difficult because we're shifting from, kind of concrete instructions, like I'm going to write a report or I'm going to make a product. We're shifting from that concrete framing to a much more abstract way of thinking about things. But you can actually use it at two levels. You can use it at a high level leadership level, and you can use it at a kind of a more detailed level. At a high level leadership kind of level question, you can just ask, well, okay. In fact, I had a CEO of a bank I was talking to recently. He said, look, I don't get into the details. When people come to me and they want to spend money, I say, okay, fine. What outcome is this initiative going to create? What will people be doing differently if we spend that money? And so it can be you can use it as a thinking experiment, right? At a very high level. He said, look, I'm the CEO. I don't get into the details.
Yeah, I love that framing, because it's going back to leading with questions.
Yeah.
Leading into there.
The more detailed version of it is, it starts with what we call the user journey, right? So what are people doing today? What are they trying to do, right? And how can we help them do the things that they're trying to do in a way that creates value for them and for us, right? So what's the user journey? And you can start just by telling a story. What are they doing today from start to finish, right? And then you may understand as you tell that story, there may be some things that are very obviously valuable, right? Well, the user comes to our website. They sign up for our email newsletter. Great. We know that's valuable, right? There may be other things that they're doing on their journey that are not obviously valuable, and we have to try to understand it, right? And so that's the hard work of product discovery and the hard work that product teams need to do. And then there's that second, once we've kind of understood that journey, we can ask the question, well, how do we get them to do this thing more, right? You see on the web, everywhere you go, the first thing you see when you hit a website for the first time is sign up for our newsletter. I was like, okay, I understand what you're trying to do, but that's not really valuable for me. In the first 10 seconds, I'm not going to sign up for your newsletter, right? And so we've got kind of two questions to deal with, like what's valuable for us? There's more than two questions. What's valuable for us? What's valuable for them? What's the intersection of those value points? And then how do we get people to do that, right? And so, yeah, what's valuable for you? Signing up. What's valuable for me? Not signing up.
So not actually. So much.
Yeah.
I was immediately captured by the work of Ken Mossman and what he does in the Integrated Adult Male course, where he helps men rediscover joy and find the best versions of themselves. His work has already had a big impact on me, and I can't wait to dive in deeper and get involved in the course. So in this clip, Kaden addresses the young men struggling with their identity, factoring in the root causes and also offering some solutions. So if you're struggling with this, or if you're a parent or an educator, I think you'll find Ken's insights very helpful.
In terms of the crisis with that's going on with where younger men, boys and men, and even men who look like you and I have a little more gray than you, but still, middle-aged men, etc. From a political standpoint, the political right, the conservatives want to drag us back to the, what was so much better in the 50s, as an example, and the political left wants to deny that there's a problem. And of course, neither of those is useful. Neither of those points of view or holding it that way is ways of holding it are useful. And so one of the things that he's pointing to, and I'm still relatively early in the book, is we need to find a way to not have it be either or, to not get out of the way, but to move forward together. And part of that lives in the arena of education. Part of that lives in the recognition that, yes, boys mature more slowly than girls do. And our institutions, our educational institutions, aren't set up to take any of that into account. Those of us in Western culture, from the time we're able to live in the world of language, have these messages thrown at us, and oftentimes they're messages about what it is to be a man, what's manhood, what's masculine, what's manly, etc. Yet it's pretty darn rare that we receive messages about what it is to be a conscious, whole adult. And what we see, in the world, out in the world, in the media, in the world of leadership, all over the place, is we see an awful lot of men. The culture, anyway, is kind of locked into a state of adolescence, but I think particularly men get locked into this endless feedback loop, endless adolescent feedback loop that includes entitlement, a certain kind of irresponsibility. There's a lot to it. I could talk about it for days. I'm not going to go down that path. But the program starts with that premise that we hear an awful lot about what it is to be a man, what it means, in air quotes, what it means to be a man, what masculinity is, what manhood is, but not a great deal about responsible adulthood. And what we do in the program is we refamiliarize ourselves with different aspects of self, our multidimensionality. So let's find that inner child and get to know him in real time, by the way. So we're not taking a backward glance, but getting to know that inner child here, now, today. These bits and pieces that are parts of us and always will be parts of us, as long as we're willing to be aware of them. Our inner adolescent, our inner young adult, looking at our inner feminine, our inner masculine, and the different aspects of the ego, really taking each of these pieces, looking at the messages that they got and the messages that they continue to carry unconsciously, so we can start to unwrap those and free ourselves from those messages and become aware. That's the biggest thing, is become aware of, oh, wow, this one's got me by the ankle, or somewhere higher up, Yep. I'm not even aware of it. So when it comes to conflict, when it comes to argument, I can show up as an adult in the equation, and the chances are I'm not going to get rattled. I might, that happens to everybody. These things are practices, but there's something about being able to show up in one's adult morph, if I may say that, use that language, in one's adult morph, and meet other people as adults rather than in family is is a great place to look, because oftentimes when we're with family, depending on the relationship with family, it's like, boom, right back. I was I was 45 when I stopped the car in front of my folks' house, but by the time I went through the front door, I was 13 again.
Yes. Know what you mean.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be refreshing then to be able to carry that change and, change the face of that relationship, to say nothing of all the others.
I love organizations that are mission focused. And what Tom Kaden and Michael Gingerich have created at Someone to Tell It To is commendable. Someone to Tell It To is a non-profit that helps others cultivate meaningful conversations and relationships through compassionate listening, training, and education. I found their approach, one, fascinating, and secondly, I can clearly see that they have a profound impact on the people they serve. So let's listen to Tom and Michael as they share a story that demonstrates how their method helps people improve their listening skills and improve their relationships as a result.
We did an exercise where we divided the group of about 38 people into groups of three, mostly three, where two people were supposed to listen, just like we do, as in pairs, while one person talked for 10 minutes. And then we took a break and then debriefed with the group. How was that? How did that sound? How did it feel? And we had a hard time as we were looking at the group during that first 10 minutes, like who was the person, who were the people who were listening? Because everyone was just talking. They were talking over one another or with one another. There was not a,
people grabbed their phones.
People were already bored after in less than 10 minutes, and they had to pick up their phone to look at messages and whatever. And we said, okay, now what that feel like? And a number of people, they said, well, we didn't really listen very well. We wanted to fix. Somebody said, I just couldn't help myself because whatever the other one person was saying, I just had to tell them how to fix this. This is how this, it could be better. And that's one of the rules that we strongly, do not permit, when we say you cannot try to fix people, because that's not good listening. Most people don't like to be told what to do. And so we did this exercise three times. And with each successive time, it got better. There was better listening. The group was quieter, and they gave the space and the time for the person who was supposed to be talking that round to actually talk. We say that it has to be non-judgmental, the listening, and it can't be fixing. It is truly giving someone, this person you're listening to, the space to say what they need to say, and even to be okay with uncomfortable silences, which most people aren't, but to let those silences be there, because that actually gives the space for the person who's talking, gives them more space to say what they need to say. And at the end of that simple half hour of those groups practicing listening, we knew that something great had happened when one woman said, while I was talking, the answer came to me what I needed to do about my problem. I didn't need them to tell me what to do. I needed them to allow me to talk it out so that the answer that was within would come. And she said, that's where the magic happens. And it was a direct quote from our book, which the subtitle was, That's Where the Magic Happens. And it was because that's exactly what listening does. Yeah. It provides the safe space for someone to be heard and literally for them to be able to hear themselves.
One of our favorite phrases or quotes comes from Walt Whitman, who once said that be curious, not judgmental.
Love that.
We actually use that tagline in the signature of all of our emails.
Not curious, judgmental. Yeah. So there's a piece for me going through my head, which is everybody's potentially listening to this, not everybody, but people listening going, well, this is basic stuff that we're teaching here. And you and I know that that's not the case. So what's your philosophy about why people struggle to listen? What's in your heads when you go into this?
Well, there are a lot of people that think that listening is just a soft skill. Like it just, we can learn it on the side, but we would say if you're in a leadership role and you're not a good listener, you're not going to be in a leadership role for very long.